Malaika had never known tenderness, never felt a caring touch that didn't bring suffering. For years, the magnificent African lion lived in absolute terror, imprisoned in a world of brutality. When rescuers finally discovered him at an illegal breeding facility, Malaika was huddled in a shadowy corner, shaking so uncontrollably that his massive frame convulsed. No one could approach. No one could reach him. Every attempt at contact was met with pure panic. He would retreat, snarl, even squeeze his eyes shut as if willing himself to vanish. Then a woman named Sarah Mitchell did something no one anticipated. And what she did amazed everyone and transformed Malaika's existence forever. Sarah pulled into the parking lot of the Haven Wildlife Sanctuary, stepping out of her vehicle into the cool morning breeze. The sun was climbing, painting long streaks across the asphalt. Today was meant to be routine. But the instant she entered, she encountered the troubled expression of Director Williams, a man who had seen countless heartbreaking situations throughout his tenure. With a solemn gesture, Williams motioned for Sarah to accompany him down the hallway to a secluded section at the facility's end. The familiar chorus of animals resonated throughout, but when they arrived at their destination, there was only stillness. In the shadows of the isolated area, Sarah saw him. A majestic African lion curled up in the furthest corner of the enclosure. His powerful build was still imposing, his tawny mane catching the dim lighting, but his entire body shook without control. His ears were pressed flat against his skull, his head lowered so deeply toward the ground that he seemed to be attempting to disappear entirely. Sarah felt her heart constrict seeing the lion's eyes and posture. She immediately recognized this wasn't a typical rescue. Malaika wasn't simply a captured wild lion. He was a survivor of merciless abuse, confined in a cramped, filthy pen, never knowing a touch unaccompanied by agony. Observing how Malaika cowered, trembled, and avoided all contact, Sarah understood this transcended mere fear. This was a shattered spirit. After a brief discussion about the lion's condition and the failed attempts to approach him, Sarah did something unexpected. Instead of attempting traditional methods, she slowly lowered herself to the floor in front of Malaika's enclosure. No sounds, no movement, no effort to touch him, simply sitting there. Astonishment was clear on William's face, but Sarah paid no attention. She concentrated entirely on Malaika, completely confident in her approach. If it required sitting there all day, she would remain all day. Malaika didn't stir, didn't acknowledge Sarah, didn't respond at all. But Sarah remained. Minutes elapsed, then an hour, then two, unchanged. Malaika stayed curled in his corner, body rigid, his entire existence consumed by terror. But Sarah wasn't leaving because she understood the first element of healing was trust, and she was prepared to wait. Sarah sat on the cold sanctuary floor, her legs tucked beneath her, her hands resting gently on her knees. Hours had passed since she first positioned herself before Malaika's enclosure, and she had scarcely moved. The rescue center continued its daily routine. Volunteers arrived and departed. Dogs received walks. Potential adopters visited, but none of that concerned Sarah. Her attention remained on the trembling lion huddled in the farthest corner of his cage. Malaika still hadn't shifted. He was wrapped around himself, his golden mane dulled under the soft light. His head was lowered so much that his nose nearly grazed the concrete floor. His strong body trembled like a branch caught in a storm, an endless tremor of fear that wouldn't cease. But there was one change. Sarah noticed it instantly. Malaika's ears weren't completely flattened anymore. They remained low, still cautious, but there was a hint of something different. Awareness. He knew Sarah was present. Williams passed by multiple times, his doubt evident. But Sarah didn't concern herself. She didn't argue. Didn't need to explain. Because at that precise moment, Malaika's ears twitched again. It was barely visible, but Sarah caught it. She understood its meaning. Sarah's entire focus was on the fragile, frightened soul before her. Time continued. She was patient. She had to be patient. Occasionally, other animals made sounds. The noises echoing through the sanctuary corridors. Each time Malaika's flinching intensified, his trembling grew worse. He closed his eyes tightly as if trying to vanish, but he never moved away from Sarah. That alone represented progress. Sarah could work with that. After what seemed like forever, the room grew quiet again, except for the occasional distant clank of metal bowls or the soft sound of wind outside. Sarah exhaled slowly, carefully, and then made her first gesture. Silently, she reached into her jacket pocket and retrieved a small piece of cooked chicken. The aroma filled the air. Malaika's nose twitched. Sarah placed the food a couple of feet away from Malaika. Not too near, not too distant, just enough that if he truly desired it, he would need to move towards Sarah. Then she waited. Malaika didn't move for many minutes. Sarah kept her breathing slow, her posture relaxed. She wouldn't pressure the lion. She wouldn't make the first approach. This had to be Malaika's choice. Another 5 minutes, then 10. Then the first miracle occurred. At first, it was almost undetectable. A slight adjustment of Malaika's front paw, a twitch of his nose. His body still trembled, but he was scenting the air. Sarah held her breath. Then, so carefully that it seemed as though time itself had decelerated, Malaika inched forward. The movement was tiny, so tiny. A single paw shifted, dragging just an inch closer. Sarah's chest tightened with emotion, but she didn't react, didn't move. Any sound, and the lion might retreat back into himself. Another inch. Malaika's eyes flickered up just for a moment. Their gazes met for the first time. And in that brief moment, Sarah saw something buried beneath the fear. A question, a silent, uncertain whisper in his broken soul. "Can I trust you?" Sarah didn't respond with words. Instead, she simply remained still, present. And finally, Malaika took another trembling step forward. His nose dipped lower, closer to the small piece of chicken on the ground. Another hesitation, another pause. Then he snatched it and darted back to his corner. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes, her hands curling into fists against her lap. It wasn't much, not complete trust. But today, for the first time in his life, Malaika had willingly approached a human, and that was everything. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the sanctuary before anyone else. The sun had barely begun to rise, casting a dim golden glow through the frosted windows. The hallways were quiet except for the occasional rustling of animals stirring in their enclosures. Sarah took a deep breath before making her way down the corridor. Today was different. Today she wasn't just hoping for progress. She was expecting it. Yesterday Malaika had made a choice. He had moved toward her. However small the step may have been, it meant something. As she approached the lion's enclosure, she felt her pulse quicken. Would Malaika still be curled in the corner, trembling as before? Or had something changed? Sarah reached the enclosure and froze. Malaika was watching her. Not cowering, not trembling violently. Just watching. Sarah's heart tightened with emotion. Slowly, she sank onto the floor, mimicking her exact position from yesterday. Malaika didn't flinch. That alone was progress. The way he didn't retreat, the way his ears twitched in Sarah's direction. It was the start of something. Sarah exhaled, composing her emotions before carefully reaching into her jacket pocket. She pulled out another small piece of chicken and placed it between them. Yesterday, it had taken Malaika almost an hour to move toward her. Today, he hesitated for only a minute. His nose twitched, his mane catching the lights. And then he stepped forward. One paw, then another. His entire body was still tense, still uncertain, but he wasn't frozen anymore. He was moving. Sarah didn't breathe, didn't blink. Malaika lowered his head. For a moment, it seemed like he might bolt again, but then he took the food, not in a panic, not in fear, but with hesitation and thought. Sarah swallowed hard, keeping herself as still as possible. Then slowly she turned her palm upward. An invitation. Malaika froze. The piece of chicken still between his teeth. His eyes flickered between Sarah's outstretched hand and the floor. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the miracle Sarah had been waiting for. Malaika moved toward her hand. Not much, just a fraction of an inch, but enough that his whiskers brushed against Sarah's fingers. Sarah's breath hitched. She didn't pull away, didn't move. And then, just as quickly as he had come close, Malaika pulled back a step. Sarah didn't let disappointment creep in. Because today, Malaika had made the choice to approach her. And that meant everything. Malaika's ears twitched at the sound of Sarah's soft breath, and then for the first time, his tail gave the tiniest flick. It was barely noticeable, a small, almost uncertain movement. But Sarah saw it, and for the first time since meeting Malaika, she let herself hope this was only the beginning. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the sanctuary with a renewed sense of determination. Malaika had taken a step forward, a real deliberate step. And last night when she replayed the moment in her mind, she kept thinking about that tiny flicker of movement, his tail flicking. It wasn't much, barely noticeable, but it meant everything. As she approached the lion's enclosure, she immediately noticed another change. Malaika had already spotted her coming, not curled in the corner, not trembling violently anymore. His ears weren't pinned back to his skull anymore. They were alert, listening. Sarah felt her heart swell. She sank onto the floor in her usual spot. Malaika didn't flinch. That in itself was progress. She reached into her pocket, pulling out another small piece of chicken and carefully placed it between them. This time, Malaika hesitated for only a few seconds, then slowly, cautiously stepped forward. One step, then another. Sarah kept still, her body relaxed, her breathing calm. Malaika's nose twitched as he sniffed at the food. But this time, instead of grabbing it and retreating, he looked at Sarah's hand. It was a silent question, a test of trust. Sarah swallowed hard, slowly, carefully. She turned her palm upward, an invitation. Malaika froze. Sarah could almost see the battle raging inside his mind. Fear versus curiosity. For a long moment he did nothing. Then he made his decision. Malaika leaned forward, his whiskers brushed against Sarah's fingers. Sarah held her breath. Then the miracle she had been waiting for. Malaika pressed his nose into Sarah's palm. Not by accident, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. She kept still, letting Malaika take the lead, and then another step. Malaika lowered his head slightly, his muzzle touching Sarah's skin. Sarah's heart pounded slowly, gently. She moved her fingers, brushing them against Malaika's fur. The lion flinched just for a second, but didn't pull away. Sarah's fingertips skimmed over his snout, barely touching, but enough for him to feel that this was different. This wasn't pain. This wasn't cruelty. This was kindness. For the first time in his life, Malaika had let a human touch him, and Sarah knew there was no turning back now. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the sanctuary before sunrise. The air was crisp, and the world outside was still covered in a thin layer of frost. The sanctuary was quiet, with only the faint rustling of animals shifting in their enclosures as they stirred awake. But Sarah wasn't thinking about the other animals. Her mind was fixed on Malaika. Yesterday he had let Sarah touch him for the first time. He had chosen to trust a human, even if just for a moment. Would today bring another step forward? Or would fear pull him back again? She walked through the hallways, her pulse quickening as she neared Malaika's enclosure. Then she saw him and her breath hitched. Malaika wasn't pressed into the farthest corner. He was waiting, his body still tense but not fearful. His ears were half raised, his amber eyes fixed on Sarah. He had been expecting her. Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. She slowly sank onto the floor just as she had done every day before. And Malaika, he didn't flinch. That in itself was a victory. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulling out another small piece of chicken. But this time, instead of placing it between them, she held it in her open palm. The test. Would he take it? Malaika's nose twitched. His body was still tense, though no longer trembling. He stared at the food, then at Sarah's hand. Another battle played out in his mind. Fear versus trust. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, ever so slowly, Malaika inched forward. One paw, then another. Sarah held perfectly still. Malaika lowered his head. His nose brushed against Sarah's fingers. And then he took the food. Not in a panic, not in fear, but calmly. Sarah blinked rapidly, forcing back the emotions swelling in her chest. This was real progress. Malaika was choosing to trust her. But what Malaika did next was even more surprising. He lowered his head and gently pressed it into Sarah's open palm. A choice, a decision, a trust that wasn't forced, wasn't demanded, but freely given. Sarah let out a slow, shaky breath. Malaika's tail flicked slightly, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. The past still haunted him, but today he had taken his biggest step forward, and Sarah knew he was ready for something more. The morning air was crisp as Sarah pulled into the sanctuary parking lot. Today felt different. For weeks, she had come to Malaika's enclosure, sitting on the cold concrete floor, waiting for him to trust. And yesterday, he had chosen her, not just by taking food from her hand, not just by stepping forward, but by pressing his head into Sarah's palm. It had been the first time Malaika had actively sought comfort from a human. It was a moment Sarah would never forget. But now it was time to see if he was ready for the next step. She made her way through the sanctuary halls, pausing at Malaika's enclosure, and what she saw nearly brought her to tears. Malaika was standing there, not in fear, not in hesitation, but waiting. His eyes met Sarah's without flinching, without retreating to the corner, just recognition. Sarah felt her throat tighten, but she didn't let the emotion overwhelm her. Instead, she did something she had never done before. She slowly opened the enclosure door. Carefully, unhurried, not forcing. Malaika tensed, but didn't run. He watched, his ears perking up slightly, alert, but not afraid. Sarah knelt down, extending her hand again, palm open. An invitation. A challenge. Would Malaika step out? For a long moment, Malaika didn't move. Sarah didn't push him, didn't urge. She waited, patient as always. Then Malaika did something that shocked everyone in the sanctuary. He stepped forward past the invisible boundary that had trapped him in fear for so long. Past the space where he had spent days trembling in terror. He stepped toward Sarah, then stopped. His nose twitched and he pressed his head into Sarah's chest. Sarah let out a shaky breath, wrapping her arms around the lion as he melted into her embrace. For the first time in his life, Malaika had found safety. He had found connection. And this time, he knew it was real because this time he had chosen it. In the weeks that followed, Malaika's transformation was remarkable. He no longer trembled. He accepted food directly from Sarah's hand without hesitation. He even allowed other staff to approach, though still cautiously. But Sarah knew this was just the first step. Malaika didn't belong in a cage, even with love. He belonged in the wild savanna, where he could roam free, where he could be himself. Sarah called a meeting with the management, presenting her plan to release Malaika back into the wild. Initially, the opposition was strong. Malaika had become too accustomed to humans. He might have lost his hunting skills. He might be in danger in the wild. But Sarah was adamant she hadn't rescued Malaika to keep him caged forever. She had rescued him so he could live the life he was born to live, free and wild. Finally, they agreed on a plan. Malaika would be taken to a remote area in Serengeti National Park where there was a natural lion population, but little human intervention. He would be fitted with a GPS collar to monitor his progress. And before release, he would be retrained in hunting skills. For a month, Sarah worked tirelessly with Malaika. Instead of placing food directly within reach, she began hiding it, forcing the lion to search, scent, and pursue. At first, Malaika was awkward, as if he had forgotten his natural instincts. But gradually, with Sarah's patience, he began to remember. His powerful muscles tensed as he lunged at the dummy prey. His eyes became sharp, focused. Each day, he grew stronger, more confident, more ready. Finally, the day of Malaika's release arrived. Sarah sat beside the transport cage throughout the long journey to the release site. The GPS collar was fitted, gentle, and non-intrusive. Malaika lay calmly, occasionally looking at Sarah with eyes that no longer held fear. When they arrived, Sarah felt a strange emotion rise in her chest, sadness mixed with joy. Sad to say goodbye to the creature she had spent so much time and emotion on. Joy knowing that Malaika would have the chance to live the life he deserved to live. The transport cage was placed on the ground, the door facing toward the vast savanna that stretched to the horizon. Sarah knelt beside it, looking into Malaika's eyes one last time. There was no fear in those eyes anymore, no doubt, only calm and strength, and perhaps something that looked like gratitude. Sarah opened the cage door. Malaika didn't rush out immediately. He stepped out cautiously, head held high, nose testing the new air. He looked around, surveying the environment with curiosity and caution. Then he looked back at Sarah one last time. In that moment, there was a deep connection between human and beast, an understanding without words, a goodbye that didn't need to be spoken. After that, Malaika turned away. Initially, he moved slowly, cautiously, but with each step, he seemed to remember his true nature. His stride became more confident, faster, and then, in a pure moment of freedom, he broke into a run. Sarah stood there, tears streaming down her face, watching Malaika sprint toward the horizon. His golden mane flowing in the wind, his powerful body moving with the grace and strength that only truly free creatures can possess. Malaika ran and ran until he was just a small dot on the vast savanna, then disappeared completely. But Sarah knew this wasn't the end. This was a new beginning for Malaika. A life without fear, without captivity. 6 months later, Sarah sat in her small office at the sanctuary looking at the data from Malaika's GPS collar. The lion hadn't just survived, he was thriving. He had established his own territory, hunted successfully, and even joined the local lion pride. And most recently, the data showed a movement pattern that Sarah couldn't mistake, the pattern of a pride male protecting his family. Malaika hadn't just found freedom. He had found a pride. He was passing on life, continuing the cycle of this magnificent African lion species. Sarah pressed her hand against the screen, smiling through tears. Her work was done. Malaika had become what he was born to be, wild, free, and unafraid. And perhaps, just perhaps, Sarah wondered, was there somewhere in Malaika's pride a part of their leader that still remembered the woman who taught him that not all humans bring pain? Was a part of Malaika still carrying the lesson of trust and patience that Sarah had taught him? Sarah would never know the answer. But she knew one thing. The moment when Malaika took the chicken from her hand, the moment when the lion chose to trust, had changed her forever. Because sometimes the most wounded hearts are the ones most capable of fierce love. And sometimes all it takes to heal is a gentle hand and endless patience. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share it with those who believe in second chances. And let's spread the message of love, patience, and hope.